The dust devil that tore through Abilene, Kansas, that scorching July afternoon in 1876, carried more than just prairie dirt. It carried a woman whose very name made hardened men cross themselves and spit 3 times for protection. Evangeline Me Hartley stepped off the westbound stage with nothing but a worn carpetbag and a reputation that preceded her like thunder before lightning. The stage driver hadn't even waited for his usual coffee before whipping his horses back toward Dodge City, leaving her standing alone in front of the Drover's Rest Hotel. She was 22 years old, with copper-colored hair that caught the afternoon sun and eyes the color of storm clouds rolling across the Kansas plains. Beautiful, men said, but cursed. The whispers started before she'd even crossed the threshold into the hotel lobby. Old Martha Henderson, who ran the mercantile across the dusty street, clutched her shawl and hurried inside her shop. 2 ranch hands loading supplies onto a buckboard suddenly found urgent business elsewhere. Evangeline had expected this. She'd expected it in every town from St. Louis to here, through every settlement where her story had traveled faster than any telegraph wire could carry. She set her bag down at the hotel counter and rang the bell. The clerk, a thin man with spectacles that kept sliding down his sweaty nose, appeared from the back room. His eyes widened when he saw her. "I need a room," Evangeline said quietly, "just for a few nights until I can find work." The clerk's Adam's apple bobbed. "Miss, I don't know if I have money." She placed 3 silver dollars on the scratched wooden counter. "I don't cause trouble. I keep to myself." The man glanced toward the window as if checking whether anyone was watching, then slowly reached for a key. "Room 7, upstairs, end of the hall. I'll need you gone by Sunday. Thank you." Evangeline took the key, its metal warm from hanging in the afternoon heat, and climbed the narrow stairs. Behind her, she heard the clerk mutter something that sounded like a prayer. Room 7 was small but clean, with a single window overlooking the main street. Evangeline set her bag on the iron-framed bed and moved to the window, watching the town below. Abilene was a cattle town, still busy despite the railroad moving operations westward. Cowboys moved between the saloons and supply stores, their spurs jingling. Somewhere a piano played badly. It looked like a dozen other towns she'd passed through, full of people who would learn her story and ask her to leave 3 husbands, all dead. That was what the rumors said, and the rumors weren't entirely wrong. The first had been Thomas Hartley, the man who'd given her his name. She'd been 18, fresh from her father's farm in Missouri, when Thomas had courted her with wild roses and promises. He'd been 25, a freight hauler with ambitions of running his own transport business. They'd married in the spring of 1872, and by autumn, Thomas was dead, kicked by a spooked horse while loading cargo in Independence. An accident, the sheriff had ruled, just bad luck. The second was James Morrison, a telegraph operator who'd known her story and married her anyway, insisting that he didn't believe in superstition. That was in '73, in a little Kansas town whose name Evangeline tried to forget. James had been sweet and patient, teaching her to read the clicking patterns of the telegraph machine. 6 months after their wedding, a fire swept through the telegraph office during a night storm. James had been inside, trying to save the equipment. The town buried him and blamed Evangeline for bringing the devil's own fortune to their community. The third husband had been the worst because she'd actually loved him. Daniel Cooper had been different from the others, a schoolteacher with gentle hands and a kind smile. He'd found her working in a boarding house in Junction City, cleaning rooms for pennies. He'd courted her slowly, learning her fears, and when he'd proposed, he'd said something she'd never forgotten. "Whatever happened before isn't who you are now." They'd married in the winter of 1875. By spring, Daniel was coughing blood. Consumption took him slowly, painfully, and with his last breath he'd squeezed her hand and whispered, "Not your fault." But the town hadn't agreed. They'd run her out with nothing but her bag and the clothes she wore. Now she was in Abilene and she knew the pattern would repeat. She'd find work, keep her head down, save what she could, and when the whispers grew too loud or the hostility too dangerous, she'd move on. It was all she could do. That evening, Evangeline ventured out to find supper. The hotel clerk had mentioned a restaurant 2 buildings down that served decent stew. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, and the street was busy with cowboys fresh off the trail, looking to spend their wages on whiskey and entertainment. The restaurant was small and crowded. Evangeline slipped into a corner table, trying to be invisible. A tired-looking woman brought her a bowl of beef stew and cornbread without comment. Evangeline ate slowly, listening to the conversations around her, talk of cattle prices, the weather, a card game gone wrong at the Bull's Head Saloon. "You're new in town." Evangeline looked up to find a man standing beside her table. He was tall, probably just past 30, with sun-weathered skin and dark hair that needed cutting. His eyes were an unusual shade of blue-green, like creek water in summer. He wore dusty range clothes and a gun belt that sat easy on his hips like he'd been wearing it since he could walk. "Just passing through," she said carefully. "Mind if I sit?" He didn't wait for an answer, just pulled out the chair across from her and settled into it with the casual confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin. "Name's Colt Brennan. I run cattle up north of here, bring them through Abilene for shipping." "I didn't ask," Colt grinned, unfazed by her coldness. "No, you didn't, but I figured I'd introduce myself anyway, seeing as how you looked like you could use some friendly conversation. I'm fine alone." "I bet you are. You've got that look about you, like you're used to standing on your own." He signaled the waitress for coffee, but being used to something doesn't mean it's what you want. Evangeline set down her spoon. "Mr. Brennan, I appreciate the gesture, but I'm not looking for company. Especially not from cowboys looking for entertainment." "Good thing I'm not looking for entertainment then." The waitress brought his coffee and he wrapped his hands around the cup. "I'm looking for a cook." That caught her attention. "What? A cook for my outfit?" "We've got a drive coming up in 2 weeks, taking a herd north to Nebraska. Our regular cook broke his leg falling off a loading platform drunk as a skunk. We need someone who can handle a chuck wagon and feed 15 hungry men 3 times a day for 6 weeks on the trail." He studied her over the rim of his cup. "You look like someone who needs work and I need someone who can cook. Seems like it might be mutually beneficial. You don't know anything about me. I know you're staying at the hotel with a single bag. I know you came in on today's stage. I know you're sitting alone in a corner hoping nobody notices you." His voice was matter-of-fact, not unkind. "And I know Martha Henderson crossed the street to avoid you, which tells me you've got some kind of story following you around, but I don't much care about stories. I care about whether you can cook and whether you're reliable." Evangeline's throat tightened. "You should care about the stories." "Why's that?" She met his eyes directly, letting him see the weariness and warning in her own. "Because they say I'm bad luck to any man who gets too close. 3 husbands, all dead. People call me cursed. They call me a black widow. Whatever town I'm in, eventually they ask me to leave because they're afraid I'll bring misfortune to them all." The words hung in the air between them. Evangeline waited for him to make an excuse and leave, the way most men did once they knew. Instead, Colt Brennan leaned back in his chair, that slight grin still playing at the corners of his mouth. "Then I'll take all your luck," he said simply. "Good and bad. Seems to me luck is just what happens when you're living your life. Can't spend your days hiding from it." Evangeline stared at him. "You're not serious." "I'm dead serious. I need a cook. You need work. The job pays $30 for the drive plus meals. You'll have your own bedroll space near the chuck wagon, and my men know better than to bother a woman or they'll answer to me." He finished his coffee and stood. "We leave 2 weeks from Monday at dawn. If you want the job, meet me at the stockyards at sunrise tomorrow, and I'll show you the wagon and supplies. If you don't show up, I'll find someone else." He tipped his hat to her and walked out, leaving Evangeline sitting alone with her half-eaten stew and a strange, unfamiliar flutter in her chest that might have been hope. She didn't sleep much that night. The room was hot and stuffy, but that wasn't what kept her awake. She kept replaying the conversation, trying to find the angle, the trick, the reason why a cowboy would offer her a job after she'd told him her history. Men didn't do that. Men heard the stories and ran. Even Daniel, who'd married her anyway, had hesitated. But Colt Brennan had just smiled and said he'd take all her luck. By the time the sun rose, Evangeline had made her decision. She washed her face in the basin, braided her hair, and put on her most practical dress, a faded calico that had seen better days but was sturdy for work. Then she walked through the quiet morning streets to the stockyards on the edge of town. The smell hit her first, cattle and dust and manure baking in the sun. The stockyards were a maze of wooden fences containing hundreds of head of longhorns, their distinctive horns stretching 6 feet or more from tip to tip. Cowboys moved among them, and the air was full of lowing and the occasional angry bellow. She found Colt near a large wagon parked beside a water trough. He was checking the wheels, running his hands over the spokes and testing the sturdiness. He looked up when her shadow fell across him. "You came." "I need the work," Evangeline said, "but I want to be clear about something. If you're expecting anything besides cooking, you're going to be disappointed." Colt straightened, his expression serious now. "Miss Hartley, it is Hartley, isn't it? I heard your name at the hotel. I'm offering you a job as a trail cook, that's all. My men will treat you with respect or they'll be walking back to Abilene, and I'll treat you with respect too. You have my word on that." Something in his voice made her believe him. Evangeline nodded slowly. "All right then, show me the wagon." The chuck wagon was a sturdy thing, built for rough travel across the plains. The back opened down to create a work surface, and inside was a maze of drawers and compartments for supplies. Flour, beans, coffee, salt pork, dried fruit, and various cooking implements. A water barrel was lashed to one side, and there was space underneath for firewood and other supplies. "We'll stock it full before we leave," Colt explained, pointing out the various features. "You'll have a Dutch oven, a couple of skillets, tin plates, and cups for the men. There's a coffee grinder here. Cowboys will mutiny faster over bad coffee than anything else. You'll drive the wagon during the day, and when we make camp, you'll set up and cook. Breakfast before dawn, lunch when we stop at midday, and supper after we bed down the herd for the night." "How many men?" 15, including me. Most of them are good fellows. A few are rough around the edges, but they follow orders." He glanced at her. "Have you done any cooking for large groups?" "I've worked in boarding houses. I can manage. Good enough." Colt showed her how to work the wagon's various latches and explained the route they'd be taking north through Kansas into Nebraska, following the Western Trail. 6 weeks there and back, assuming good weather and no major problems. "It's hard work," he warned. "Long days, hot sun, sometimes rain. We might run into rustlers or hostile situations. But I've made this drive 5 times and only lost cattle once, and that was to a lightning stampede. I'm not afraid of hard work." Colt studied her for a moment, and Evangeline felt the weight of his gaze. It wasn't lecherous or dismissive. It was appraising, like he was trying to figure out who she really was beneath the rumors and the careful walls she'd built. "Why'd they really run you out of those other towns?" he asked finally. "The truth, not the gossip." Evangeline looked out at the cattle milling in their pens. "The truth is my husband's died. The truth is bad things happened around me and people needed someone to blame. It's easier to believe in curses than in bad luck or God's will, or just the hard fact that sometimes people die for no good reason at all. You believe you're cursed." "No," she met his eyes again, "but I believe other people believe it, and that makes me dangerous to be around. If something goes wrong on this drive, if a man gets hurt or the cattle stampede or we run into trouble, they'll blame me. They always do. Then we'll just have to make sure nothing goes wrong," Colt said easily. He extended his hand. "Do we have a deal?" Evangeline looked at his outstretched hand, calloused strong, offering her something nobody had offered in a long time, a chance. She took it and his grip was firm and warm. We have a deal. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Evangeline spent her days learning the wagon and its quirks, going over supply lists with Colt, and figuring out how to cook meals for 15 hungry men with limited resources. Colt advanced her enough money to buy proper trail clothes, split skirts that would let her move easily, sturdy boots, a wide-brimmed hat to keep off the sun, and a canvas coat for rain. She met the men who'd be making the drive. Most of them were young, in their 20s, with the lean, sun-darkened look of men who spent their lives outdoors. They eyed her with curiosity and varying degrees of suspicion, but Colt's presence kept them respectful. There was Pete, the segundo or second-in-command, a 40-year-old cowboy who'd worked with Colt for years and had a weathered face that rarely smiled. There was Tommy, barely 19, on his second drive and eager to prove himself. There was a pair of brothers, Jack and Sam Riley, who finished each other's sentences and worked together like two parts of the same person. And then there was Wade Garrett, a lean man in his mid-30s with cold eyes and a sneering mouth. From the moment Evangeline met him, she didn't like him, and the feeling was clearly mutual. "A woman on the trail is bad luck," Wade said loudly the day before they were set to leave, making sure everyone could hear. "Especially that woman, you all hear about her, 3 dead husbands. They ought to call her the Black Widow of Kansas. They ought to call you unemployed if you don't shut your mouth," Colt said flatly. He'd appeared from behind the chuck wagon, and his voice carried the kind of quiet authority that made Wade take a step back. "Miss Hartley is our cook. She's part of this crew and she'll be treated like any other member. If you have a problem with that, you can collect what wages I owe you and find another outfit." Wade's jaw worked, but he nodded and stalked away. Pete came up beside Colt, shaking his head. "Wade's got a point, even if he's a jackass about it," the segundo said quietly. "Men are superstitious. If anything goes wrong, we'll deal with it like we always do." Colt cut him off. "She's a good cook and she needs the work, that's all that matters." Evangeline, listening from inside the wagon, felt that unfamiliar flutter in her chest again. Nobody had defended her like that since Daniel died. She climbed down from the wagon and found Colt checking supplies. "Thank you," she said. "For what you said to Wade." Colt glanced up. "I don't tolerate bullying in my outfit. Besides, I meant what I said that first night. I'll take all your luck, remember? Good and bad. You might regret that, I might." His eyes held hers, and for a moment the bustling stockyard seemed to fade away. "But I doubt it." They left Abilene on a Monday morning just as the sun was breaking over the eastern horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Evangeline sat on the wagon seat, reins in her hands, and watched as the cowboys moved the herd out. There were nearly 800 head of cattle, a sea of brown and white bodies flowing across the prairie like a living river. Colt rode up beside the wagon on a big sorrel gelding. "You ready?" "As I'll ever be. Stay with the herd, but not too close. The dust will be bad." "Pete knows the trail. He'll help you find the right pace." He smiled, and Evangeline noticed how it changed his whole face, softening the hard lines and making him look younger. "And don't let the cattle intimidate you. They're more afraid of you than you are of them." "I doubt that," Evangeline muttered, but she clicked her tongue to the team and the wagon lurched into motion. The first few days were brutal. The sun beat down mercilessly, and the dust from 800 cattle created a constant brown haze that got into everything: her eyes, her mouth, her clothes. She learned to tie a bandana over her nose and mouth like the cowboys did. She learned the rhythm of the trail. Rise before dawn to start coffee and cook breakfast. Pack up the wagon while the men got the herd moving. Drive all morning until the midday stop. Cook a quick lunch. Drive all afternoon until Colt found a good spot to bed down for the night, then cook supper and clean up before falling into her bedroll exhausted. The men were wary of her at first, but she won them over with food. She made biscuits that were light and fluffy, even cooked in a Dutch oven over an open fire. She made beans seasoned with molasses and salt pork. She made son-of-a-gun stew when one of the cattle had to be slaughtered, using every part of the animal. And she made coffee strong enough to put hair on a man's chest, which earned her a rare smile from Pete. "You're doing good, Miss Hartley," the segundo told her one evening after supper. "The men are happy, which means they're working hard. That's all that matters out here." Even Wade. Evangeline had noticed the cold-eyed cowboy watching her when he thought she wasn't looking. Pete's expression darkened. Wade's got his own demons, best to stay clear of him. But staying clear of Wade proved impossible on a cattle drive where everyone lived and worked in close quarters. A week into the drive, while Evangeline was cleaning up after breakfast, Wade approached the wagon. "Colt's sweet on you," he said without preamble. "That's why he hired you. That's why he defends you." Evangeline kept scrubbing the tin plates. "Mr. Brennan hired me because he needed a cook." "Keep telling yourself that, Black Widow, but we all see how he looks at you, how he rides over here every night to check on you. How he makes sure you've got enough water, enough firewood." Wade spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "He's a fool. You'll bring ruin on all of us just like you did to those husbands." "My husbands died of accidents and illness," Evangeline said, her voice tight. "Not curses, maybe. Or maybe you're just good at making death look natural." Wade leaned closer, and Evangeline smelled whiskey on his breath. "I'll be watching you. When things start going wrong, and they will, I'll make sure everyone knows who to blame." He walked away, leaving Evangeline shaken. She knew his type, the kind of man who needed someone to hate, someone to blame for his own failures and fears. She just hoped Colt's authority would be enough to keep Wade in line. That night, a storm rolled in from the west. Evangeline saw it coming, a wall of dark clouds crackling with lightning moving fast across the plains. The temperature dropped and the wind picked up, whipping her skirts around her legs. "Get the wagon secured," Colt shouted, riding hard toward her. "We're going to get hit hard." The cowboys scrambled to secure the herd, knowing that lightning could spook the cattle into a stampede. Evangeline worked quickly to stow everything loose in the wagon, tie down the canvas covers, and make sure nothing would blow away. The first raindrops hit like bullets, cold and hard. "Get under the wagon," Pete yelled at her. "Stay there until it passes." Evangeline crawled under the chuck wagon just as the storm hit in full force. Rain poured down in sheets, turning the ground to mud. Thunder crashed so loud it felt like the earth was splitting open. Lightning flashed, illuminating the prairie in stark white bursts. She could hear the cattle bellowing in fear, hear the cowboys shouting to each other, trying to keep the herd together. Then she heard it, the sound that every cowboy feared. The rumble of thousands of hooves as the cattle bolted. "Stampede!" someone screamed, and through the rain and darkness, Evangeline saw the herd running, a mass of panicked animals charging across the prairie. The cowboys raced after them, trying to turn the leaders, trying to get them running in a circle before they scattered completely. Evangeline pressed herself flat under the wagon, praying it wouldn't get overturned by the stampede. The ground shook with the force of the running cattle. Time stretched out, endless and terrifying, and then, gradually, the thunder of hooves faded. The rain continued, but the lightning moved east, and in the gray dawn light, Evangeline could see cowboys returning, soaked and exhausted. She crawled out from under the wagon and immediately started working to get a fire going. The men would need hot coffee and food. It took her nearly an hour to coax flames from wet wood, using dried moss and paper from her precious supply as tinder, but finally she had a fire crackling and coffee boiling. The men straggled in, muddy and tired. Colt was among the last to return, and Evangeline's heart clenched when she saw blood on his shirt. "You're hurt." "It's nothing, got clipped by a horn when I was turning the leaders." But he swayed in the saddle, and Pete had to help him down. Evangeline made him sit by the fire while she examined the wound. It was a deep gash on his left arm, still bleeding. She tore strips from her petticoat, the men looking away politely, and cleaned the wound with boiled water, then bandaged it tightly. "You need to rest," she told him. "Can't. We need to round up the strays, see how many we lost." But even as he said it, he was leaning heavily against the wagon wheel, his face pale under the dirt and mud. "The men can handle it," Pete said firmly. "You stay here and let Miss Hartley take care of you. That's an order, boss." The ghost of a smile crossed Colt's face. "You can't order me around, Pete. I've known you since you were 16 years old. I can damn well order you around when you're about to fall over from blood loss." Colt didn't argue further, which told Evangeline how badly he was hurting. She made him drink coffee and eat, then settled him in the shade of the wagon with a blanket. Within minutes, he was asleep. That's when Wade made his move. "See," he said loudly, gathering the other cowboys around. "I told you she was bad luck. First real storm we hit and we stampede. The boss nearly dies. How many cattle did we lose? 20, 30, and it's all because she's here." "That's ridiculous," Tommy protested. "Storms happen, stampedes happen. It's got nothing to do with Miss Hartley." "Then why did it happen now?" Wade pressed. "Colt's made this drive 5 times without a serious stampede. But we bring the Black Widow along and suddenly everything goes to hell." "Enough." Pete's voice cracked like a whip. "We stampeded because lightning hit too close to the herd. That's all. Anyone who says different can take it up with me." But Evangeline could see the doubt in some of the men's faces. The seed Wade had planted was taking root. She served them breakfast in silence, feeling their eyes on her, hearing their whispered conversations. When Colt woke a few hours later, she told him what Wade had said. "I'll deal with him," Colt said grimly, trying to stand and wincing at the pain in his arm. "No, you're hurt and you need to heal. Besides, he's just saying what some of the others are thinking. You can't change superstition with threats." Evangeline handed him more coffee. "Maybe it would be better if I left. You could send me back to Abilene with some of the men who need to collect supplies." Colt caught her wrist, his grip gentle but firm. "Don't you dare. Don't you dare let men like Wade Garrett drive you away. You've done nothing wrong. The stampede wasn't your fault, and anyone with sense knows it. But they don't have sense. They have fear. Then we'll show them there's nothing to fear." He was looking at her intently now, his blue-green eyes holding hers. "Stay, Evangeline, please, I want you here." The way he said it, the rawness in his voice made something shift in her chest. This wasn't just about the job anymore. Maybe it never had been. "Why?" she whispered. "Why does it matter so much?" Colt was quiet for a long moment. Around them, the camp was busy with men working, but they might as well have been alone. "Because you're the first person in a long time who's made me feel like there's more to life than just moving cattle from one place to another. Because you're brave and strong and you keep going even when the world keeps knocking you down. Because when I look at you, I see someone worth knowing, worth caring about." Evangeline's breath caught. "You don't know me. Then let me. Stay on the drive. Let me learn who you are and you can learn who I am, and at the end of it, if you want to go your own way, I'll understand. But at least give us a chance." She should have said no. She should have protected her heart the way she'd learned to protect it after 3 dead husbands and a dozen towns that had run her off. But when she looked at Colt Brennan, with his honest eyes and his wounded arm and his stubborn refusal to believe in curses, she found herself nodding. "All right, I'll stay." The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise. The days that followed formed a new rhythm. Colt's arm healed slowly, and Evangeline changed his bandages every evening after supper, her fingers gentle on his skin. They fell into a habit of sitting together after the camp settled down, talking quietly while the fire burned low. She learned that Colt had been orphaned at 15 when cholera took his parents. He'd worked as a ranch hand until he saved enough to buy his own cattle, then built his herd through hard work and smart trading. He'd never married, never found the right woman, he said. The trail was his home, and most women wanted something more settled. Does it get lonely? Evangeline asked one night. Sometimes. But I've got Pete and the men, I've got the work, it's been enough. He paused. Until now. Evangeline knew what he meant because she felt it too, this growing connection between them, fragile as new grass but undeniably real. When he smiled at her, her heart beat faster. When he rode close to the wagon during the day, she found herself looking for excuses to talk to him. And when they sat together in the evenings, she felt something she hadn't felt in years, safe. But Wade continued to poison the well. Little things went wrong: a broken wagon wheel, a supply of flour that got wet and moldy, one of the younger cowboys breaking his wrist when he fell from his horse. Each time, Wade made sure to remind everyone that bad luck had followed Evangeline onto the trail. "Ignore him," Colt advised. "The men see how hard you work. They're eating better on this drive than they have in years. They'll come around." Some did. Tommy started helping her gather firewood. The Riley brothers always made sure she had enough water. Even Pete, gruff and taciturn, began nodding greetings to her in the mornings. But some didn't come around, and Wade's influence grew stronger as they pushed deeper into Kansas, heading toward the Nebraska border. 3 weeks into the drive, they reached the Platte River. The water was running high from spring melt, and the crossing would be dangerous. Colt spent the afternoon scouting for the best place to ford, finally choosing a wide, relatively shallow section where the current wasn't too strong. "We'll cross tomorrow at first light," he announced at supper. "Water's cold and fast, but the bottom's solid. We'll get the cattle across first, then bring the wagon over." Evangeline had heard stories about river crossings, how cattle could panic in deep water, how wagons could overturn, how men and animals could be swept away by the current. She tried not to let her fear show, but Colt noticed. "It'll be all right," he said quietly, walking with her to the wagon after supper. "I've done this a dozen times. But I haven't. What if something goes wrong? What if the wagon overturns all the supplies? Won't happen. I'll have ropes on the wagon and the strongest swimmers will be guiding you across. You just have to keep the team calm and let them do the work." He touched her shoulder, the gesture brief but reassuring. "Trust me." "I do," she realized. "That's what scares me." Colt's expression softened. "Evangeline, I need to tell you something. These past few weeks, getting to know you, spending time with you, it's meant more to me than I know how to say. You're not cursed. You're not bad luck. You're just a woman who's had more than her share of sorrow, and you've survived it with grace and strength. That's not a curse, that's courage." Her throat tightened. "Colt, I know it's too soon. I know you've got no reason to trust another man after what you've been through. But when this drive is over, I'd like to court you properly. Take you to dinner, maybe a dance if Abilene's got one, see where this thing between us might go." He smiled crookedly. "That is, if you're willing." Evangeline looked up at him. This man who'd offered her a job when no one else would, who'd defended her against gossip and suspicion, who'd sat with her every night and listened to her stories without judgment, who made her laugh and made her hope and made her think that maybe, just maybe, she deserved something good. "I'd like that," she whispered. Colt's smile could have lit the whole prairie. He lifted her hand and kissed it gently, his lips warm against her skin. "Then we've got something to look forward to after we cross this river." They crossed at dawn. Evangeline watched from the bank as the cowboys drove the cattle into the water. The longhorns bellowed and balked, but the experienced hands kept them moving, pushing them across the wide river. The water reached the bellies of the horses, sometimes higher, and the current was strong. But the herd made it across, the lead animals climbing up the far bank and shaking water from their hides. Then it was time for the wagon. Pete and 2 other strong riders attached ropes to the wagon, one on each side, to help stabilize it against the current. Colt rode close to Evangeline. "Keep your team moving forward. Don't let them stop or turn. If something happens, jump clear and grab onto a saddle horn. One of us will pull you out. Understand?" Evangeline's mouth was dry, but she nodded. She clicked her tongue and the team started forward into the water. The cold hit immediately, rising up the horses' legs and then up the wagon wheels. Water sloshed into the wagon bed. The current pushed hard against the side and Evangeline felt the wagon tilt. She kept the reins firm, urging the horses forward, trusting them to find their footing on the rocky bottom. They were halfway across when she heard the crack. The rear axle, weakened by weeks of rough travel, snapped. The back of the wagon dropped into the water, and suddenly they were tilting dangerously, the current catching the wagon bed and pushing it sideways. Evangeline felt herself sliding off the seat. Jump. Colt was beside her instantly, reaching out. "Take my hand," she grabbed for him, but the wagon lurched and she fell into the cold water instead. The current immediately grabbed her, pulling her downstream. Her heavy skirts dragged at her legs. She went under, swallowing water, panicking. Then strong hands caught her, hauling her up. She gasped for air, coughing, and found herself pressed against Colt's chest as he guided his horse toward the bank. His arm was like iron around her waist, holding her secure. They reached the far shore, and Colt didn't let go until they were well clear of the water. He dismounted and pulled her down, his hands running over her frantically. "Are you hurt? Did you hit anything? Evangeline, look at me." "I'm fine," she managed, still coughing up river water. "Just scared." Behind them, the other cowboys had managed to get the wagon to shore before it sank completely, but water poured from it, and she could see that many of their supplies were soaked or lost. Wade rode up, his face twisted in vindictive triumph. "You all see that. See what her bad luck brought us. We lost half our supplies because of her curse. We should leave her here." Some of the men muttered agreement. Even Pete looked troubled, but Colt stood, water streaming from his clothes, and faced them all down. "That axle was cracked before we started this drive. I should have replaced it, and I didn't. That's on me, not on Miss Hartley. Anyone who says different can come say it to my face." Nobody moved. "Now we're going to salvage what we can, and we're going to finish this drive. We've got enough supplies to reach the railroad in Nebraska, and we can restock there if needed. But I don't want to hear another word about bad luck or curses. Miss Hartley is part of this crew, and she stays. That's final." He turned his back on them, his arm still around Evangeline's shoulders, and led her toward the wagon. That night, after they'd made camp and dried what they could of the supplies, Evangeline sat wrapped in a blanket, still shivering despite the fire. Colt had given her his own dry shirt to wear, and he sat beside her close enough that she could feel his warmth. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, "about the wagon, about the supplies. Wasn't your fault. Wade's right, though. Bad things happen around me. Maybe not because of a curse, but they happen. And people get hurt." She looked at him, her eyes stinging with unshed tears. "I don't want you to get hurt, Colt. You've been kinder to me than anyone has in years, and I couldn't bear it if something happened to you because of me." Colt reached out and gently turned her face toward his. "Listen to me. I'm a cattleman. I've been kicked by horses, gored by bulls, caught in stampedes, thrown from wagons, and shot at by rustlers. I've had hailstorms and droughts and prairie fires. Bad things happen because that's life, especially out here on the plains. It has nothing to do with you." "How can you be so sure?" "Because I know you. I've watched you for 3 weeks now. I've seen how you work yourself to exhaustion feeding everyone. How you doctored my arm and never complained about the extra work. How you're kind to Tommy even when he asks 1,000 questions, and how you stand up to Wade even though he frightens you. That's not a person who brings bad luck. That's a person who brings light." A tear slipped down her cheek. "I want to believe that. Then believe it, believe me." He wiped the tear away with his thumb, the gesture so tender it made her heart ache. "And believe this, I'm falling in love with you, Evangeline Hartley. I don't care what happened in your past. I care about who you are now and who we might be together." "Colt," her voice broke, "you don't have to say anything back, I just needed you to know." He pulled her close, and she let herself lean against him, drawing strength from his solid presence. "You're not alone anymore. Whatever comes, we'll face it together." For the first time in years, Evangeline let herself cry, not tears of grief or fear, but tears of relief. Someone believed in her. Someone saw past the rumors and the bad luck and the curse that wasn't really a curse. Someone wanted her anyway. "I'm falling in love with you too," she whispered against his chest. "I think I have been since that first night in the restaurant. I was just too scared to admit it." She felt him smile against her hair. "Not scared anymore, terrified," she admitted, "but I'm tired of running. I'm tired of being afraid. If you're brave enough to take a chance on me, then I'm brave enough to take a chance on you." Colt pulled back just enough to look at her, and what she saw in his eyes made her breath catch. Then he kissed her, soft and sweet and full of promise, and the rest of the world fell away. The remaining 3 weeks of the drive passed in a blur of hard work and stolen moments. Colt and Evangeline kept their relationship quiet, not wanting to give Wade more ammunition, but everyone knew. The way Colt looked at her, the way she smiled when he was near, the way they sat together every evening talking quietly or just being close, the men's attitudes shifted. Some, like Tommy and the Rileys, were openly supportive, happy to see their boss finding happiness. Others remained wary but stopped making comments. Wade kept his distance, though his cold eyes tracked Evangeline's every move. They reached the railhead in Nebraska without further incident. The cattle were loaded into freight cars and shipped east, and Colt collected his payment. He paid the men their wages, bought new supplies, and prepared for the journey back to Kansas. On their last night before starting the return trip, he took Evangeline to a small restaurant in town, a real restaurant with tablecloths and candles. She wore her least worn dress, and he'd cleaned up until he looked like a different man, his hair neatly trimmed and his face shaved smooth. "You clean up well," she teased as they sat down. "You look beautiful," he said, and meant it. The candlelight caught in her copper hair and made her gray eyes shine like silver. "Evangeline, I meant what I said by the river. I love you. And I know we haven't known each other long, but out here, time moves different. A month on the trail teaches you more about someone than a year in town." "I know," she said softly, "so I'm going to ask you something, and you can take all the time you need to answer. No pressure." He reached across the table and took her hand. "When we get back to Abilene, I want you to marry me. Not right away, we can have a proper engagement, let you get used to the idea. But I want to build a life with you, Evangeline, a real life. I've got land north of Abilene, good grazing land. We could build a house, run cattle, maybe raise some kids if you want them. I want to give you the home and the happiness you deserve." Evangeline's heart was so full she thought it might burst. "What about the bad luck?" Colt grinned. "I'll take all of it, remember? Every last bit, and I'll count myself the luckiest man alive to have you by my side." She laughed, a sound of pure joy that made other diners look over and smile. Yes, I'll marry you, Colt Brennan. I don't need time to think about it. I've never been more sure of anything in my life." He stood up, pulled her to her feet, and kissed her right there in the restaurant, not caring who saw. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and grinning, the other diners applauded. The journey back to Kansas was lighter somehow, despite the empty wagon. Evangeline rode beside Colt most days, and they made plans. They'd marry in the fall after the next drive. She'd help him run the ranch, maybe keep a garden, learn to raise chickens. They talked about building a house with a big kitchen and windows that looked out over the prairie. They talked about the future with the easy confidence of people who'd found what they were looking for. Wade grew quieter as the days passed, but Evangeline didn't trust his silence. She could feel his eyes on her, sense his resentment simmering beneath the surface. Pete noticed too. "Watch yourself around Wade," the segundo warned her one afternoon. "A cornered snake is most dangerous when it's got nothing to lose." "What do you mean?" "I mean Colt's letting him go when we get back to Abilene. Word got around that Wade's been stirring up trouble, and no other outfits will hire a man who causes discord on the trail. He knows his reputation's ruined, and he blames you." Evangeline felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. "I'll be careful," but careful wasn't enough. They were 2 days from Abilene when Wade made his move. It was evening, and Evangeline was at the chuck wagon preparing supper. Most of the men were with the herd, setting up the night watch. Colt had ridden out to scout the next day's trail. She was alone when Wade appeared. "You think you've won," he said, his voice low and ugly. You think because Colt's fool enough to marry you, everything's going to be fine, but you're still cursed Black Widow, still death walking. Stay away from me, Wade. Evangeline reached for the knife she used for cutting vegetables, holding it where he could see it. Or what? You'll put a curse on me, he laughed, a harsh sound. I'm not afraid of you, but I'm going to make sure Colt sees what you really are before he makes the mistake of tying himself to you. He lunged forward and grabbed her wrist, trying to wrestle the knife away. Evangeline screamed, fighting back, but Wade was stronger. They struggled, knocking over pots and pans, and then suddenly Pete was there, hauling Wade off her and throwing him to the ground. You're done, Pete said flatly. Get your gear and get out. You can walk back to Abilene. You can't do that, Wade scrambled to his feet. Only Colt can fire me. Then consider it done, Colt said, riding hard into camp with his gun drawn. His face was murderous as he dismounted. I heard her scream from a mile away. What the hell did you do? Nothing. I was just talking to her and she went crazy. He attacked me, Evangeline said, her voice shaking. He tried to take the knife. Colt's jaw clenched. Get out, take your horse and whatever gear you can carry and get off my land. If I ever see you again, I'll finish what Pete started. For a moment, Evangeline thought Wade might try something stupid. His hand twitched toward his gun and the whole camp seemed to hold its breath. But Pete's hand was already on his own weapon, and so were those of several other cowboys who'd come running at the commotion. Wade's face twisted with rage, but he was outnumbered and outgunned. Fine. But mark my words, she'll bring you nothing but ruin, Brennan, you'll see. He gathered his things in angry silence and rode off into the gathering darkness. Nobody watched him go. They were all looking at Evangeline, making sure she was all right. Colt wrapped her in his arms, his whole body shaking. Did he hurt you? No, I'm fine, just scared. She clung to him, feeling the rapid beat of his heart. Is it always going to be like this? People trying to hurt me because they think I'm cursed? No, Colt said fiercely. Because you're going to be my wife and everyone in Kansas will know that you're under my protection. Anyone who wants to hurt you will have to go through me first. And me, Pete added gruffly. And us, Tommy chimed in, and the Riley brothers nodded agreement. Evangeline looked around at the circle of weathered, sunburned faces, these men who'd been strangers 7 weeks ago and were now something like family. Maybe not all of them believed she wasn't cursed, but they believed in Colt and they respected her, and for now, that was enough. They reached Abilene on a bright afternoon in late August. The town looked the same as when they'd left, but Evangeline felt different. She wasn't the woman who'd arrived alone with a carpetbag and a reputation. She was someone who'd survived a cattle drive, earned the respect of hard men, and found love in the last place she'd expected. Colt settled accounts with his men, and they dispersed to the saloons and hotels, eager to spend their wages. Pete clapped Colt on the shoulder. I'll get the gear stored and the horses settled. You take Miss Hartley and get her somewhere comfortable. She's earned it. Colt took Evangeline to the Drover's Rest, the same hotel where she'd stayed before. The clerk's eyes widened when he saw her walk in on Colt Brennan's arm. A room for the lady, Colt said, his voice carrying the quiet authority that made men listen. Your best one. She'll be staying until we're married and she's to be treated with respect. Understood? Yes, sir, Mr. Brennan, of course. The clerk scrambled for a key. Room 3, top of the stairs. I'll have fresh water sent up right away. Colt walked Evangeline to her room carrying her battered carpetbag. Inside, he set it down and turned to her. I need to ride out to my land, check on things, talk to my foreman. I'll be back tomorrow. And then, if you're still willing, we'll go see the preacher and set a date, he smiled. Unless you want to wait longer, like I said, no pressure. Evangeline stepped close and kissed him, pouring everything she felt into it, gratitude and love and hope and joy. I don't want to wait. I've wasted enough time being afraid. Let's get married as soon as possible. Next week then, I'll arrange everything. He kissed her again, slow and sweet. Get some rest, take a bath. Do whatever women do when they're not cooking for 15 hungry cowboys. You've earned it. After he left, Evangeline did exactly that. She took a long, hot bath, washing weeks of trail dust from her skin and hair. She put on her cleanest dress and walked through town, no longer ducking her head or trying to be invisible. People stared. She knew they were wondering what Colt Brennan was doing with the Black Widow, but she held her head high. At the mercantile, she used some of the wages Colt had paid her to buy fabric for a wedding dress. Martha Henderson, the shopkeeper who'd crossed the street to avoid her 2 months ago, helped her pick out a beautiful cream-colored cotton with tiny blue flowers. "I heard you went on the drive," Martha said, her tone carefully neutral. "That you did a good job." "I did my best." "And I heard Colt Brennan's going to marry you." Evangeline met the woman's eyes steadily. "He is." Martha nodded slowly and something in her expression softened. "Then I reckon we misjudged you. Colt's a good man. He wouldn't marry someone if he didn't trust them. And if he trusts you, well, that's good enough for most folks." It wasn't an apology, but it was close. Evangeline took it as the peace offering it was. "Thank you for the fabric, it's beautiful. You'll make a lovely bride." Colt returned the next day with news. His ranch was thriving, the cattle he'd left behind were fat and healthy, and his foreman had kept everything running smoothly. He'd also spoken to the preacher, who'd agreed to marry them the following Saturday. "That gives us a week to get ready," Colt said. They were sitting in the hotel restaurant, sharing a meal. "I know it's quick, but I don't want to wait. I've wasted enough years not knowing you. I don't want to waste any more." "Neither do I." Evangeline reached across the table and laced her fingers through his. "What will people say?" "I don't give a damn what people say. You're going to be my wife and they'll accept it or they won't, but either way, we're building our life together." The week passed in a flurry of preparation. Evangeline sewed her wedding dress, working late into the night by lamplight. She'd never been much of a seamstress, but she poured her heart into every stitch, wanting to look beautiful for Colt. Tommy's mother, a kind woman who'd heard the story and approved of the match, helped her with the more complicated parts, setting in sleeves, hemming the skirt, adding a bit of lace at the collar. Colt made arrangements for a small reception at the hotel after the ceremony. He invited his men from the drive, his foreman and wife, and a few other ranchers he did business with. It would be small and simple, but it would be theirs. On Saturday morning, Evangeline woke early, her stomach fluttering with nerves and excitement. She put on the cream-colored dress and pinned up her copper hair with pins Martha Henderson had given her as a gift. She studied herself in the small mirror and barely recognized the woman looking back. She looked happy, radiant even. Not cursed, not a Black Widow. Just a woman about to marry the man she loved. The ceremony was held in the small white church at the edge of town. Evangeline walked down the aisle alone. She had no family, no one to give her away. But when she saw Colt waiting at the altar in his best suit, his face lit up with such joy. She didn't feel alone at all. The preacher spoke about love and commitment, about faith and hope, and then Colt was slipping a simple gold band onto her finger and saying, "I take all your luck, good and bad, from this day forward." Evangeline laughed through her tears. "And I take yours, all of it, forever. Then by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Colt did sweetly and thoroughly, and the small gathering applauded. Pete, sitting in the front row, was grinning. Tommy was wiping his eyes. Even Martha Henderson, who'd come to watch, was smiling. The reception was joyful and loud. The Cowboys told exaggerated stories about the cattle drive, making Evangeline blush and Colt laugh. Someone produced a fiddle, and there was dancing in the hotel dining room. Colt held Evangeline close, swaying to the music, and whispered in her ear. "How does it feel to be Mrs. Brennan?" "Like coming home," she whispered back. "Like I've finally found where I belong." "You have, with me, always." They spent their wedding night at the hotel. Colt had insisted on giving her one more night of comfort before they headed to the ranch, and in the morning, they set out together for their new life. The ranch was everything Colt had described and more. Rolling prairie stretched as far as the eye could see, dotted with grazing cattle. The house was small but sturdy, built of wood and stone with a wide porch and windows that let in the morning light. There was a barn, a corral, a chicken coop, and a garden plot waiting to be planted. "It's not much yet," Colt said, suddenly nervous, "but we'll build it up together, make it a real home." "It's perfect," Evangeline said honestly. "It's ours, and that makes it perfect." They settled into married life with surprising ease. Evangeline took over the household duties, cooking and cleaning and tending the garden. She'd never had a home of her own before, had always lived in boarding houses or tiny rented rooms, and she threw herself into making the ranch house warm and welcoming. She sewed curtains for the windows and a quilt for their bed. She planted vegetables and herbs, learning by trial and error what would grow in the Kansas soil. Colt worked long days with the cattle, but he always came home for supper, and they'd sit together on the porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over the prairie. He told her about his day, and she told him about hers: the chicken that had escaped and led her on a chase, the tomatoes that were finally ripening, the letter she'd written to Tommy's mother thanking her for her kindness. They were happy. It was as simple and as complicated as that. Fall came, and with it came Roundup and another drive. This time, Colt hired a different cook, an older man named Dutch who'd been working cattle drives for 30 years. Evangeline stayed at the ranch, tending things while Colt was gone. She missed him terribly, but she also reveled in the independence, the knowledge that she was capable of running the ranch herself if needed. When Colt returned 6 weeks later, tired and dusty and grinning, he swept her into his arms and carried her inside, and they didn't emerge until the next morning. Winter settled over the prairie, and they were snowed in for weeks at a time. Evangeline had feared she'd be lonely or bored, but instead she found contentment. She and Colt played cards by the fire, read books aloud to each other, and made love under piles of quilts while the wind howled outside. They talked about everything and nothing, their pasts, their hopes, silly things that made them laugh. They learned each other in the way that only married people can, discovering quirks and habits and preferences. In February, Evangeline realized she was pregnant. She told Colt one morning over breakfast, shy and nervous about his reaction. They talked about children but abstractly as something for the future. This was real and immediate. Colt stared at her for a long moment, his coffee cup forgotten in his hand. Then he set it down, came around the table, and pulled her into his arms. "A baby," he said, his voice full of wonder. "We're having a baby. Are you happy?" "Happy," he laughed, a sound of pure joy. "Evangeline, I'm the happiest man alive. We're going to have a family, a real family." Their son was born in October of 1877, during the golden days of autumn when the prairie grass turned amber and the sky stretched blue and endless. Evangeline labored for 10 hours with the help of the foreman's wife and a midwife from town, and when she finally heard her baby's first cry, she wept with relief and joy. Colt held his son with shaking hands, his eyes bright with tears. "He's perfect. You're perfect. I can't believe he's ours." They named him Daniel Thomas Brennan, Daniel for the husband who'd believed in her, Thomas for Evangeline's father. He had Colt's eyes and Evangeline's copper-colored hair, and from the moment he entered the world, he owned both their hearts completely. Life settled into a new rhythm, busier and more chaotic but full of laughter. Daniel was a happy baby, quick to smile and curious about everything. Evangeline would strap him to her back while she worked in the garden, and Colt would take him out to the barn, teaching him about horses and cattle even though he was too young to understand. "He's going to be a rancher," Colt said proudly one evening, holding Daniel up to watch the sunset. "Fourth generation if you count my grandparents." "He can be whatever he wants," Evangeline said, but she was smiling. She loved watching Colt with their son, loved seeing the gentle way he handled the baby, the pride in his voice when he talked about the future. 2 years later, they had a daughter, Sarah Mee, born in the spring with her father's dark hair and a stubborn streak a mile wide. Then came another son, Joseph, 2 years after that. The house that had seemed so spacious when Evangeline first arrived now rang with the sounds of children, laughter and crying, and the thundering of small feet. The ranch prospered. Colt's reputation as an honest cattleman grew, and buyers sought him out. They bought more land, expanded the herd, built a bigger barn. Evangeline started raising chickens in earnest, selling eggs in town, and her garden became legendary in Abilene. People who'd once whispered about the Black Widow now greeted Mrs. Brennan with respect and friendliness. Martha Henderson became a genuine friend, stopping by the ranch for coffee and bringing fabric scraps for the children. Tommy, who'd settled in Abilene and married a local girl, brought his own family to visit. Even Pete, who'd retired from trail driving, bought a small place nearby and became a regular fixture at the Brennan dinner table, becoming Uncle Pete to the children. One evening, when Daniel was 5 and Sarah was 3 and baby Joseph was asleep in his cradle, Evangeline and Colt sat on the porch watching their older children chase fireflies in the twilight. "You ever think about it?" Evangeline asked quietly. "About the curse. About what people used to say." Colt reached over and took her hand, his thumb rubbing over her wedding ring, the same simple gold band he'd placed there 7 years ago. "Sometimes, but only to think how wrong they were. You didn't bring me bad luck, Evangeline, you brought me everything. A home. A family, a reason to build something that lasts." He raised her hand to his lips and kissed it. "You brought me joy. That's not a curse. That's a blessing." Evangeline leaned her head on his shoulder, watching their children play, listening to their laughter ring out across the prairie. She thought about the frightened woman who'd stepped off the stage in Abilene all those years ago, carrying nothing but a carpetbag and a reputation. She thought about 3 dead husbands and a dozen towns that had driven her away. She thought about all the lonely years when she'd believed the rumors, believed she was cursed. And then she thought about Colt, the cowboy who'd looked past the rumors and seen her, who'd offered her a job and then his heart, who'd said he'd take all her luck, good and bad, and had meant it. "I love you," she said softly. "I love you too. Always have, always will." The years continued to pass, bringing new challenges and new joys. There were hard winters and dry summers, years when the cattle prices were low and money was tight, and years when everything went right. There were illnesses and accidents, the normal difficulties of ranch life. But through it all, Colt and Evangeline faced everything together, their love deepening with each passing season. Daniel grew into a serious boy who loved horses and had his father's gift with cattle. Sarah was wild and fearless, always climbing trees and racing her brothers. Joseph was gentle and thoughtful, preferring books to ranch work but devoted to his family. When Daniel was 12, they had one more child, a surprise daughter named Grace, who arrived with a full head of copper hair and immediately became the darling of the family. Evangeline watched her children grow with a heart so full it sometimes hurt. These were the children she'd never thought she'd have, the family she'd believed was impossible. And every time one of them laughed or hugged her or called her mama, she sent up a silent prayer of gratitude for the cowboy who'd taken a chance on a woman everyone else had given up on. When Daniel turned 18, he announced he wanted to work the ranch full-time rather than go east to school. Colt had been quietly hoping for this, though he'd never pressured his son. They celebrated with a family dinner, and afterward, Colt gave Daniel his first real responsibility, overseeing part of the herd. "Your grandfather would be proud," Colt told his son, his hand on Daniel's shoulder. "I'm proud. You're going to be a fine rancher." "I learned from the best," Daniel said, and the look he gave his father made Evangeline's eyes sting with tears. The years turned. Sarah married a neighboring rancher's son, a good man who made her laugh and wasn't intimidated by her stubborn streak. Joseph went to college in the East, studying to be a teacher like Daniel Cooper had been, and came home summers to help on the ranch. Grace grew into a beautiful young woman with her mother's copper hair and her father's steady temperament. And through it all, Colt and Evangeline remained the center of their family, the the steady foundation on which everything else was built. They celebrated 25 years of marriage with all 4 children, and a growing number of grandchildren gathered around their table. Pete was there, now in his 70s but still spry, telling the grandchildren embellished stories about their grandmother's first cattle drive. She wasn't afraid of anything, Pete said, making Evangeline laugh. Not stampedes or river crossings or even Wade Garrett, bravest woman I ever knew. She still is, Colt said, his eyes on his wife. She was 50 now, with silver threading through her copper hair, but to him, she was as beautiful as the day he'd first seen her in that restaurant in Abilene. The day I met her was the luckiest day of my life. The day I met you was mine, Evangeline said softly, and kissed him while their children groaned good-naturedly and the grandchildren giggled. That night, after everyone had gone home or to bed, Colt and Evangeline sat on the porch as they had 1,000 times before. The prairie stretched out before them, dark and vast under a sky full of stars. This land had been their life's work, building something from nothing, creating a legacy that would outlast them both. "Do you ever regret it?" Colt asked. "Saying yes to me all those years ago, taking a chance." Evangeline turned to him, this man who'd been her husband for 25 years, the father of her children, her partner in every sense of the word. "Not for a single moment. You gave me everything I never thought I could have, a home, a family, a life worth living. You saw me when everyone else saw a curse." "I saw you," Colt agreed. "The real you, and I loved what I saw." They sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, watching the stars wheel overhead. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. There was always work to be done on a ranch. But tonight was for gratitude, for reflection, for appreciation of the life they'd built together. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl called. The wind rustled through the grass. And inside the house that had started small and grown over the years to accommodate their expanding family, their grandchildren slept safely, dreaming dreams of their own. Evangeline thought back to that dusty afternoon in July of 1876 when she'd stepped off the stage in Abilene, carrying nothing but a carpetbag and a reputation. She'd been so alone then, so convinced that she was cursed, that happiness wasn't meant for her. And then a cowboy with blue-green eyes had looked past the rumors and offered her a job. Had sat across from her in a restaurant and said he'd take all her luck, good and bad. Had courted her on a cattle drive and loved her despite everything the world had said about her. He'd given her a life she'd never dared to dream of. And in return, she'd given him her heart, her loyalty, her love, and a family that would carry on long after they were both gone. They say she was bad luck to any man. But the truth was, she'd been the best luck Colt Brennan had ever known, and he'd been hers. Together, they'd built something that would last, not just a ranch or a family, but a love story that would be told around dinner tables for generations. And that, Evangeline thought as she leaned her head on her husband's shoulder and felt his arm come around her, was the best luck of all.